Like a combination Taco Bell and KFC, Outpost Infinity Siege is trying to be a suspicious number of things at once. But while this ambitious and absurdly complicated multiplayer first-person shooter real-time strategy tower defense game is covered in a thick layer of jank, it defies the odds by actually being pretty darn competent at most of the things it attempts. Sure, the story is laughably bad. The voice performances gave me a full-body cringe.
I haven't had a good fight like this in ages.
And there's so much grinding and RNG that you'll be seeing the same levels way too often. But all of those complaints stand in stark contrast to the numerous ways Infinity Siege knocks it out of the park. The FPS combat is smooth and satisfying. The real-time strategy offers a ton of room for scheming, and the tower defense mechanics delightfully allow you to take on entire armies from atop a fortress of gunfire. Outpost Infinity Siege might bite off way more than it could chew, but also like a combination Taco Bell and KFC, it often delivers exactly what you're looking for. Infinity Siege has you fighting off massive waves of robots by both firing weapons yourself and deploying turrets, traps, and other defensive structures to do the work for you. In between surviving large-scale offensives, you'll upgrade a growing base filled with recruitable operatives and vendors, make improvements to your mobile outpost, and bounce between an incredibly dense series of menus that take a dozen hours to fully comprehend. If that sounds intensely daunting to you, that's because it is, and Infinity Siege almost seems proud of its needlessly intricate systems, constantly adding more and more layers. I won't sugarcoat it, folks. Learning how to do everything from constructing an outpost piece by piece to modifying your weapons is a lot of work, but once you put in the time and effort to do so, it's incredibly rewarding.
The hell?
Less time appears to have been put into the story though, which is terrible from beginning to end. Playing as Faye, post-apocalyptic Earth's least interesting soldier, you struggle against a man-made artificial lifeform that has driven humanity to the edge of extinction, and fight back by making use of your own AI, who is every bit as robotic and forgettable as her human companion.
Find anything?
Yulia was correct. The Aitos does indeed possess another weakness.
The dialogue is filled with cliches and pointless filler. Nearly every cutscene is a complete waste of time, and there isn't a single worthwhile character in the entire cast. The voice performances are also atrocious. Just take a listen to these inspiring deliveries.
Human form is confinement. Cease imitation.
These faults aren't actually a huge deal breaker in the larger scheme of things, since most of the plot is contained to short missions in between the bulk of the adventure. But man oh man, you're real bad.
Call for evac. We're going home.
Infinity Siege clearly focuses more of its attention on the robot destroying, which is such a big step up from the story it'll give you whiplash. You'll spend most of your time doing tours, which have you traveling along a series of levels, grabbing up as much delicious loot as you can. Once you run low on the electricity needed to keep your mobile base moving, you'll begin an exciting final extraction event called Recovery Day, where you enter a standoff against countless robo-baddies and have to hold out until all your loot has been carried away. These encounters mix a whole bunch of cross-genre elements together to awesome effect. One second you're hopping into the cockpit of a mech to unleash hell upon a giant robot, the next you're entering command mode to build some structures from above before the next wave of enemies arrives. Fighting in first person is shockingly well-tuned for a game that has to juggle so many different genres. You have a multifunctional and highly customizable XEN gun, which I just called a Zen gun, that could be configured to function as a machine gun that does elemental cryo damage, a slow-firing shotgun that makes things explode at close range, or lots more. You can also take direct control of certain structures on the battlefield, like a giant cannon to shred the weak point of a boss. Alternatively, you can stow your weapon and focus on customizing and maintaining the outpost that automates the defense of your cherished core, which will end your run if destroyed. Or you could go back into command mode to tell any mobile minions or stationary weapons to fire at specific enemies or areas directly. Swapping between these three elements throughout a prolonged siege makes for a seriously good time, allowing for very few dull moments in the action. While the extraction serves as a tour's grand finale, much more of your time will likely be spent in each of the small and less exciting levels spread across the map. These mini encounters are pretty slow-paced, involve minimal combat, and mostly have very minor objectives, like finding a certain piece of loot or killing 4 specific enemies. The main function of these stages is to search the area for the best loot you can, which is used to upgrade your weapons or armor and build structures for your outpost, and then stuff it into your cargo hold in preparation for recovery day. But that doesn't always make for the most compelling action, as you'll be scanning shelves, opening crates, and stripping tires from cars. Even worse is that each of these 4 areas only has a handful of levels you repeatedly visit every tour, meaning you'll become extremely familiar with the layout of those maps. When you're not out in the field, you'll spend your time managing the roughly 50 different RPG systems for upgrading your characters, equipment, base, outpost, and more. Yeah, it's a lot. Chief among those is the Outpost Builder, which allows you to customize the mobile structure you defend while behind enemy lines. The number of gadgets, gizmos, and guns available is impressive, and what starts off as a small box you can decorate with basic turrets eventually becomes a monstrous fortress covered with every kind of booby trap and deadly weapon imaginable. It's also great that the cap on how many weapons you can include in your base is limited only by how many you can craft and keep reloaded. I never once found myself unable to grow my arsenal as I leveled up my outpost's size and added more and more crazy defenses, and that felt very freeing. Beyond your outpost, you'll also craft and upgrade guns that can be given different firing modes and a whole bunch of perks, recruit additional randomly rolled characters to play as on tours instead of Fae, each with their own skill tree, and improve aspects of your base itself by assigning your characters to different duties while they're idle. If you're anything like me, you'll also spend a bunch of time hungrily searching the world for schematics, and will feverishly focus on trying to unlock the technology tree that enables a whole bunch of capabilities, including the ability to craft new and interesting weapons to be added to your outpost. There's seriously just so much to learn, invest in, and optimize that I sometimes spent an hour or more just hanging out at my base tinkering with things.
Perhaps you'd be interested in my services.
While I was able to get through every level of Infinity Siege solo in about 60 hours, there's also multiplayer that lets up to 3 others join you on tours, or team up for a side activity called Endless Mode, where you take on waves of increasingly deadly enemies. Endless Mode is a great way to get lots of loot quickly, and feels like it was designed with multiplayer in mind thanks to a non-stop intensity that's made a lot more manageable with friends around. It's also nice to be able to bypass the more humdrum part of a tour and get straight to the action. Like doing tours solo, playing with friends has its ups and downs, since most of the time you're just on autopilot looting areas for the 50th time. But at least that process goes by a lot faster since friends can help you carry the load. Recovery Day is definitely the highlight though, and since any player can build in command mode, take direct control of cannons and mechs, or just run around killing things, it makes for a chaotically fun time. Playing with friends is awesome, especially since they're likely to have interesting loadouts with mods and armor you haven't seen before, and you can check out their outposts to see what creative shenanigans they've gotten up to. Outpost Infinity Siege takes some pretty big swings with its mishmash of ideas, and succeeds at a surprising number of them, whether it's the insanely dense RPG mechanics, its tight FPS gunfights, or its open-ended base-building options. It certainly doesn't stick the landing everywhere, with a dreadful story, overly grinding and RNG-driven progression, and levels that become predictable after a few visits. But even so, I found myself gladly sinking dozens of hours into a delightfully weird and unpolished adventure that's unlike anything I've played before. Not everyone is going to have the patience to learn the sometimes incoherently complicated systems required to get the most out of Infinity Siege, but those willing to make the effort are in for a very good time. For more, check out our reviews of Dragon's Dogma 2 or Rise of the Ronin. And for everything else, stick with IGN.